This is Kevin Pruitt with Rising Tide Startups, and my guest today is Peter Selby. Peter, thank you for joining us on Rising Tide.
My pleasure.
It's good to have you. And Peter is a repeat guest unintentionally. So we tried to do this a few weeks ago, and I think the loose nut behind the wheel was on my end, and I think I was the one that just couldn't pull it off. But I think we had like 7.4 billion people on the internet at the same time. So we were dealing with a lot of buffering issues, and it was right at the peak of everybody trying to get online at the same time, I think. So hopefully we're going to have much better luck today. So Peter, tell our audience a little bit about Peter Selby.
Okay, so Peter Selby started his professional career in the UK in a place called Bristol in the southwest of England, and started life on the railroads, actually in the railways, which back then was a job for life. I mean, you sort of go there and you're expected to stay there, do your apprenticeship, and retire there, you know. So I did an apprenticeship in electrical engineering, went and studied at college, and did that for a number of years, about a decade actually, but realized it wasn't going to be a job for life for me. And I always had this urge to work for a company that made things, either in a factory or some sort of process. I didn't know why at the time. And in actual fact, everyone back then thought I was crazy because I had this fantastic job on the railway where, you know, doing signaling and engineering on the railways, you're outside all year. You've kind of got your time to yourself. It's a maintenance environment, so you're not being measured by the minute, and you want to leave that and go work in a factory. You're crazy. However, I did, and kind of never looked back, really. I worked for an electrical engineering company for a few years to get the hang of the manufacturing processes, and I just loved it all. I loved the process environment. I loved the sort of continuous improvement side of it all, and even enjoyed the corporate politics to some level.
You're a rare bird.
Organizations. So I started as how did I start? I started in a factory on a night shift, working a braiding machine, braiding cables, putting steel braids on cables that were to run in hazardous environments. I worked my way up from there, really. My last job in the UK then was running a recycling business, recycling laser jet cartridges, which is quite an interesting time. It was when I got there, it was a pyramid of cartridges in a shed that needed turning into a factory and some sort of environment that people could work in. So yeah, no, it was good. And always had an itch to travel. And theoretically, I guess you couldn't travel any further from England than New Zealand, and that's where I ended up.
Exactly, yeah.
And I got into the steel industry in New Zealand from the point of view of bringing best practice processes from Europe into New Zealand. And at that time, we're talking the early 90s, New Zealand was quite a long way behind the rest of the world as far as best practice process was concerned in that manufacturing environment. And companies were only just getting their heads around getting international accreditations like quality and safety and all the things that go with it. So my first job was to set up systems to enable a company to get ISO 9000 certification, which is the international standard around quality control. And brought me into the steel industry and process manufacturing, which was a new thing for me, and I loved it. Again, even more process than before. And worked my way through that industry. I started in a manufacturing area that made rural products and moved through into making steel in a steel plant, which was interesting environment, harsh, but really challenging, quite good. So from there, I moved to Australia and married an Australian in the process, which wasn't part of the plan, but there you go.
Oh, congratulations!
That outcome.
Congratulations. Yeah. Let me ask you a question real quick. So when you're moving from these industries, did you move because of the technical expertise you had, just like in process or operations, or are you relearning every time you kind of shifted into a new industry?
You are, to a degree. I mean, you know, the business principles that hold businesses together are the same.
Sure.
Whether you're building a spaceship or or making paint, but there are obviously specifics for each industry. But what that led me to, there was a lot of different approaches to doing the same thing, because every state, it's a bit like the US, every state has a different idea of what's the right thing to do in Australia. And labor relations are completely different in every state. Approaches to business are very different. And I could see at the time, there was also this very two-speed economy in Australia where all the money was being made out of minerals and oil and gas, and that was propping up the country. And the other manufacturing process was slowly leaking out to Asia, where the labor was cheaper. And really, there was no focus in that environment. And the best practice that I could see at the time were at the behest of the large corporates that could afford to have a team of consultants from KPMG or wherever,
Right.
working permanently in their organization, or in fact have their own staff, and have a team of people working on best practice process. So I figured at the time there must be a more simple way to do this and make it available to anybody rather than just the top few companies. And if you think of I guess the 80-20 rule, the A-class companies in the world are between 10 and 20% of all the businesses going, or businesses underway, and only 20% of them had best practice in them, so so that's what brought the birth of Business Drivers. And Business Drivers was formed in 2008. But I'd also quickly realized you can't just turn up at the door of somebody and say, hey, I'm now a consultant, give me some work, because there's no process for them to adhere to. It's just and sure, you always leave a corporate environment with a network, and you can tap into that network for a wee while, because people trust you and they know you and they've seen you work. But if once you move into a space where people don't know you, you need more than just you saying, trust me. And so we built a process that took a number of years to perfect, actually. And I was doing fixed term corporate roles to fund it all. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of investment to get it right. But eventually we ended up with a process, like a business optimization machine that you can plug into any size business in any market, really. It's a bit of a unique approach. And from the client's perspective, the good point is they get to see the whole journey. And that's quite rare in consulting. Quite often people turn up to do specific assignments. They'll hire a business advisor to do a particular piece of work. Or if you have an army of consultants in an organization trying to drive fast results, there's no clear path to where that's going to end.
Right.
We have quite a clear roadmap where we show the client, we do a deep analysis of what's going on now so they can fully understand all the moving parts in their business and how well it's performing and where the opportunity is. We then give them a clear view of what the benefits of those opportunities are, for whether it's worth pursuing or not from a return on investment perspective, and then work out a plan with them of how much of it they'd like to do themselves, how much do they need professional help for, what's the payback, what's the time period.
Sure.
And we then share the risk. So we don't charge, like most consultants will charge, a day rate or an hourly rate. We don't. We take a proportion of the savings we've brought to the business at the end of the work. So there's no risk from the client's perspective. It's a win-win.
So
Sorry?
It sounds like to me that if you're just taking a percentage of the first year, that this is pretty front end loaded. So you come in, you kind of analyze the process, you put your process in place, and then kind of realize the savings or realize the net gain at the end of the year. But if I'm a business and you come in and you do this well, I'm like, okay, so what's next? Or is there a year two? Or can you do this again? Can you? So is there a recurring
Well, there absolutely is.
Retainer?
That's a great question. Yeah. So the other differentiator, I suppose, is we build a roadmap to a continuous competitive advantage rather than a one-off exercise. So we do this deep analysis at the start. We run all the processes and do that analysis again at the end for two reasons. One, to make sure that the processes that have been designed have been adopted throughout the business. But secondly, things change in that time, and new opportunities may come up, or the company may have decided to go down a different path with some stuff, and that in itself has opened up some. So we just check that there aren't some more opportunities now hidden away that we can unlock and run through the process again. So you could run through the process forever. It doesn't tend to work that way. By the time you've done the second analysis, there's normally, assuming that the company have adopted all the processes, there are normally just tweaks and small amounts of opportunity that come up, and you run through that second process very quickly.
Yeah.
What we do encourage customers to do is let us do that analysis every year, because it's not a huge piece of work for them. And, you know, if it unlocks nothing in the third year, it demonstrates that they're really under quite a lot of control. But markets change so much, you know, and one of the differences between what you might categorize as an A-class company, where they have a continuous improvement methodology in their thinking, is they naturally assume that tomorrow is different today. And the problem is, when you're a fairly good company and you're not under pressure and you're getting reasonable margins, there's no reason to keep going. And if you think of companies, I mean, I can give you two classic examples of companies that did and companies that didn't. If you think of Apple with the iPod, you know, they were earning millions and millions of dollars at the time out of that, and they could have stopped. That's good enough. And it's called the good enough line, by the way, because it's a real issue. Companies often don't go past it, but they kept pouring money into R&D, and as a result, we all have smartphones today, you know.
Yep.
Think of a company that didn't do that, that again was making very good margins at the time, had a global footprint, and think of Blockbuster Video.
That's exactly the one I had in mind.
Really well, but they assumed that tomorrow would be the same as today, and they're now a casualty because of that. You know,
the dinosaur died. Yeah.
Well, exactly, but they were a very good business, and they had a great business model, but they didn't foresee things like Netflix, you know, and the world was changing, and the signs were all there, and there's, you know, there's lots of cases. Nokia's another company, Kodak. There's there's a whole raft of them. So we really do try and encourage clients to keep on the front foot about what the future looks like and how that may affect them.
Let me ask you real quick about like consulting. Like when you come in and you talk to a company as a potential client, do companies tend to hire consultants based on the program that they offer or the expertise that they have, or is it some combination thereof?
Well, that's an interesting question as well. So part of developing all of this process is the fact, when you go in as a business advisor, you do need more than just expertise. You've got to have a process that the clients can follow and understand what you're going to do. Because at the end of the day, the CEO or whoever it may be that's in charge of that profit and loss is really putting their job on the line by letting you tamper with their business. So they have to be able to trust that you've got a method that you're working to, and it's demonstrated it can work. And that's what we spent a lot of time doing. So we've since, over the years, built a business advisory machine, if you like, which now others are able to plug into. So another thing we offer people are to be licensed associates. So rather than, you can imagine, you know, you've been in a corporate all your life, you want to get out and have more control over your life. Or if you think of the current environment where there may be a lot of people that are now not working that we're expecting to at this point in time, and they think, well, I've got a lot of expertise, I can get out in the market and sell my wares. They can now plug into something that gives them an instant access to do that, with all the systems around it, all the processes. It's an established business, and generate work that way, you know. So that's kind of another leg of the business, but that's been developed more recently because of all the systems and the kind of business advisory machine that we've built over time, which was never the intent. The intent was, of course, just consulting, but to do that, you need a lot of processes and systems,
right?
And of course, a team that can cover it all.
So many times, you know, you see these guys that you know have had a good corporate career, and they may take early retirement, and they say, you know what, I'm just going to go consult now, and it's like the only process they really have is just, well, this is what I did in my career. You know, this is what I saw happen at the Fortune 500 company I used to work for or whatever. And it really is, all they can do is kind of this one size fits all methodology that says, well, we did this in our company, it's got to work here too. And they may not have the understanding that these are completely different environments, you know, completely different factors that are, you know, external and internal factors. And I like the way that you kind of phrase that, needing the balance of expertise and a workable system, you know, at the same time.
Well, and a wider skill set. So the point you've just made is a classic that we see a lot of the time. If you have somebody that's worked their life in even if it's a few corporates, rather than just one,
Right.
and built up a raft of experience around that, they tend to have a particular skill in their background. Either they've got a financial background, a sales background, a
Hmm.
production background, whatever it may be. So they are limited to what they can offer from that perspective. And if you're gonna, and that's very aligned to having short-term assignments. And people that leave the corporate world and go, the first step tends to be contracting before you're consulting. You'll go work on fixed-term contracts,
Yep.
and 80% of the people that go into the market stay as contractors. And the reason for that, there's a thing called the fear line, where you have to mentally make the jump from being told what to do to advising others what to do. And there's a psychological barrier to doing that because of the perceived risk around it. So, you think of this, 80% of the market stays as contractors. The 20% that move over then stay in their world from their background. So that aligns you to short-term assignments or specific assignments, very bespoke, particular problem. If you want to have the larger, higher paying assignments and longer assignments, you need to be able to take the client on the journey, and that needs a range of skills. And we've been very careful to build a wide-ranging team. So we have, supply chain experts, financial experts, project control experts. You need a whole raft, sales experts. You need the raft of skills that cover all the business disciplines.
Right.
I couldn't possibly do it. I do a lot of the corporate strategy work because of my background. But if I was then asked to set up financial systems for a company, how do I do that? So we have somebody, luckily, that is a chartered accountant and can do those things. But you do need that raft. You can't just have the process. You also need the delivery machine, the people behind that process. That took some painful lessons learning that. I mean, we started in 2008. We're now, 12 years down the track. But before we were really singing and humming, we were probably 5 years in before we
Yep.
really got it nailed.
Right. Yeah. Well, I
Not
want to
quite as
honor
long.
your time today. I could continue just drawing questions out of you all day long, but I really wanted. I told you before we turned on the camera that that I wanted to talk specifically about like the COVID-19 and how the business process and how how do you navigate well and lead a team through this. So just take a couple minutes and just kind of drill down. As someone that has that leads a team and has been in many different environments, what's some best practices right now for founders, especially early stage founders, to kind of lead teams through this well?
Great question. So we've been doing a lot of work with people over the last few weeks, as you can imagine. When you get a rapid downturn in your business, it could be for a million reasons, there is a few approaches that you really need to take. And what's unique about right now is everybody's having a downturn at once. So where you might have been able to quickly flip from one customer to another to get around a problem, that process isn't there anymore. The first advice I'd give is there are some short-term decisions you need to make and some tactical decisions that you need to make. Don't do that at the expense of your strategy. So there's a lot of time being spent, assuming you have a business strategy, working out where you're going, what you're doing, why you're doing it. Those larger parameters haven't changed. The world has gone to sleep for a while, but you've got, it's a little different than a global recession in as much that it's very quick, and the reasons that business were doing well before that recession are still there. There's still money in the banks. The recovery should be a lot quicker. So you do need as much focus on the ramp up as you need on the ramp down. What we're seeing quite a lot is companies get completely lost in cost control measures and very short-term thinking, not thinking about how do we get back up, and when we do, how do we make sure we're stronger than when we went down? Because by default, there'll be less competition. I mean, that's just a fact of life. Some people won't survive this. And it's normally the people that get caught up in the short-term stuff that don't survive. So think about the ramp up as much as you think about the ramp down. But also think about the key stakeholders in your business, the supply chain in your business. Think about the resilience of your business more than the immediate profit and loss, because the immediate profit loss is affected, the revenue's been turned off. Bang. You've got to face that, and you've got to make, cost-cutting decisions around that. But the tactical stuff is about the resilience. How do you make your business less viable, less exposed to this in the future? How do you solidify your supply chain? How do you solidify your suppliers? Work with your suppliers, the stakeholders, keep the board informed. There's all of those things to do. In fact, we've got a complimentary tool online that people can go to our website and just download it to try and help people at the moment. It's there for anybody that wants to use it. In fact, we're about to do a version 2.0 because we've had a fair bit of feedback about how to improve it, which is great. But it's for that reason. Work through your issues systematically, but stick to the knitting, stick to your plan, because you will be ramping up sooner rather than later in some countries. If you think of the part of the world where we are in Australia and New Zealand, they're already ramping back up, and companies have already been caught short-footed where they've done so much cost control and they just haven't thought through how they're going to get back and how are they going to stay a step ahead of their competitors. That competitive environment you were in before the downturn is still there, and there's most of those competitors will survive.
Because of the short-term nature of in areas like New Zealand and Australia, or just period?
Well, if you think about it globally, it's still short-term, right? I mean, we're not going to be 100% for some months, there's no doubt, but the money and the business is still in the system, so the return should be quicker as a result of that. Now, I know that's a very generalist thing to say, and some industries are struggling much more than others. If you think of tourism, geez, the cruise industry is going to be affected for some time to come, but manufacturing less so, construction less so. Sure, the tourism industry is going to struggle, but it's not like people don't want to travel. And there's another formula behind all this. A global recession doesn't have a vaccine.
What did you say a second ago about I wanted to actually get that printed on a t-shirt. You said something like the money and what is still in the machine?
Sure. I mean, it's not like a recession where the money and the wants and the needs are still in the banks and in the businesses. It's all still there. It's just been put to sleep. So take away the barriers and it will return. Now, obviously, the longer you stay asleep, a bit like an operation on a table, the longer you're out, the harder it is to recover. And some industries that'll sleep longer will, be a longer road getting back. But for the majority of business, it's not like that. And we're seeing that already in the countries that are turning stuff back on. Factories are already operating. They can't, in fact, funny enough, I'm talking to a customer in a couple of days' time who has a problem where they now don't have enough manufacturing capacity because they've got to catch up for the stuff for the 4 or 5 weeks they've been behind. Well, it's a classic example. But those supply chain issues, that's what they call supply chain amplification, where you get false storages inside the supply chain, have to iron out, and that has an impact at one end or the other. Either you can't feed the machine enough, or there's too much in there and no one's buying anything. But it's still short-lived. Those ripples move out very quickly, and you're back to normal.
Right.
So yes, make sure that you stick to your plan and be ready for the ramp up because it's coming.
In this time that so many people are facing such a difficult time, I mean, you're speaking with such certainty that stay the course, stick to your strategy, plan for resilience. You're going to have to do some cost cutting measures for sure, but stay the course and kind of ride this thing out well, and you will come out of this stronger on the back end because competition will be less, and it just will be, and you need to be ready when that opportunity hits.
But if you're going to improve processes and systems, and I'm not saying this because I'm a consultant, the cheapest time to do it is when you have less people or less activity, because you can divert your workforce into continuous improvement and make it happen very quickly. Then when you ramp up, you either need to ramp up with less resource, or you're running a much more efficient operation and you're ahead of the competition. So it's actually a very advantageous time. The problem is I guess the natural thing to do is, that's money we don't have right now, so let's not spend it and keep costs cut and you try and start up as well as you did before, and that might be okay, but don't forget some of your competitors will have taken that time to do smart things, you know. So it swings and roundabouts, and it's again why we try and not charge a lot of money up front for work, because we can plug into an organization now without it being high risk at a time when people don't have the money to spend and start the improvement process. So there are swings and roundabouts around this stuff, but the smart companies, and the other thing I guess of note, the companies that are forward focused and thinking about the rebound actually ride the storm better now, because they're still doing their strategic thinking and they're not as reactive to the short term. So they actually ride the storm better, even before the ramp up happens. So it's just an observation we've seen over the last few weeks.
Well, this is a perfect time to take advantage of the services that your company offers, and I mean, at virtually no risk. I mean, you know, you're paid just out of whatever the savings are, or the increased revenues. So, I mean, this is a perfect time, and I want to get that link from you, so we'll make sure that it's in the notes for the link for the COVID-19 process or template that you developed. So I want to make sure we may be better to wait till version 2.0 is live,
that's only a week away. But I mean, even version 1 it'll make you think systemically.
Right.
It's just there's a wider thing for version 2.0, but and it's on our website, and we can, like you say, we can put the link up. Bizdrivers.biz. It's a very simple web address. Even if you go to the homepage, there's a button there. It's very easy. We're trying to help people through the rough times, you know, especially, and I get it for small businesses that have just started. I mean, that, you know, you imagine you go out in your boat for your first sail and bang, there's a force 9 on you.
Yeah.
But you'll learn a lot in the process. And if you can stick your navigation and your compass due north where you've had your strategy and stay on course, you will ride the storm.
What a great way to end. I mean, it just perfectly fits into the whole rising tide motif that we have around this podcast. But Peter, we want to make sure that we have your books linked into the show notes as well, and as resources for people. But just thank you again for taking the time today.
Sure, that's another resource for people. There's I released a book about a year ago on defining a roadmap to profit and growth, and it's all about the levers to pull when you're thinking about either getting a business going or taking your business to the next level or turning a business around. And again, it's a free resource. Just go online, you can book it. I do also offer an hour of my time for people that have taken the time to take the book, especially if they've read it, because it's the old 80-20 rule. Only 20% of people find the time. So we do send snippets and emails and things in case you don't have time to read the book, just to keep you tuned into the thinking. But there's an hour's worth of time for complimentary there to help you think through your priorities and stuff. So again, it's there as a support to the industry and the people in it. And if it's a help at this time, then great.
Peter, what a generous offer, and I have downloaded the book, so I'm looking forward to diving in, and I may circle back with you for that hour someday. But thank you again just for taking the time today and just sharing so much information and value, and it's been a real pleasure just to connect with you again today, and just thank you for helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Peter, have a great day.
Thanks very much. Thank you.